Until the 11th of January, Northern Ireland had not had a government for 3 years. And in the second week of January, a new executive was finally formed. A lot of people thought it was a loveless marriage, forced by events rather than by desire. The elections in December had produced difficult results for both the DUP and Sinn Féin. The murder of Lyra McKee, now a year ago, had changed the atmosphere in Northern Ireland and created a new demand for change. And the health strike that took place just before Christmas put nurses onto the front line and out on strike for the first time, creating huge pressure for change. Of course, the executive picked up a series of issues which had been there for a long, long time. The most obvious one was Brexit, with huge implications for the future of Northern Ireland. But behind that were all the issues that had played into the 3-year gap. The Renewable Heating Initiative report was due. There was a new Office of Identity and Cultural Expression, which was a way to try to resolve the almost impossible issue of language and culture. Questions of legacy were back on the table after the elections. And money, always an issue in Northern Ireland, was part of the controversy arising out of the deal, when it emerged that maybe some of the money that people had expected was not going to be put on the table by the British government. And at the very heart of the immediate challenge was a crisis that everybody could see in the health service. Not just pay, not just morale, but actually in the quality of service, which seemed to be deteriorating by the week in Northern Ireland. Many people thought that the job of Minister of Health was the poison chalice. And when Robin Swann stood up and took the post, almost at the end of the allocation of ministries, many people were surprised that it hadn't been the very last one to go. Robin Swann himself had been the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, but he'd been seen to be defeated in some of the earlier elections in 2019 and was no longer the leader of the party. So he wasn't necessarily in the strongest personal position, but he did have what everybody agreed was the hardest job in government. But nobody knew exactly what we were going to face. As Harold Macmillan once said, the most difficult thing to manage for any politician is events, dear boy. And the huge constitutional challenges and economic challenges and cultural challenges around Brexit, the budgetary issues which were there in the government, and the mistrust in government all seemed to be so big as to be insoluble until the biggest crisis of a generation took place. And it didn't come from here. It came, of course, through the COVID-19 or coronavirus crisis. After coronavirus hit, it was clear we were facing a global pandemic with immediate local implications. Nothing mattered after Corona except developing a policy for health and for the protection of the population. This was new issues, and it certainly needed a new approach. What is interesting, of course, is that lack of tolerance for failure probably deepened. It simply wasn't an option to collapse the executive, although, to be fair, it never really came to pass. The scale of the issue also indicates that everything has to take its place beside the need to address the real challenges of popular feeling, but also of the real risks to lives that COVID-19 means. And the changes that it is likely to bring are not likely to be short term. And the Northern Ireland Executive has survived the last month. And many people might say, because it survived this, it has a new opportunity. Of course, we have to see. But it is already something to be marked up against its history. But underlyingly, we can still see some of the cracks every now and again. We saw them immediately when there were divisions between Britain and Ireland over the date of actually introducing the lockdown. Should we shut schools? Already we had a big public debate about whether we should be following Britain or Ireland, which mostly ran along traditional lines around who people trust, who people look to, and who people want to be aligned to, not necessarily any clear understanding of science. When the Deputy First Minister went on television and attacked the Health Minister, there was a further crack in the executive, which materialised further into death threats against the actual Health Minister, after which it subsided. But when the army was deployed to start to build hospitals, there were further stresses and strains along traditional lines. And the police have still found it very difficult to maintain social distancing at funerals which have not been organised by not being organised officially, but are very much part of Republican tradition. So the truth is, underlyingly, we don't know if things have changed. What we do know, however, is COVID-19 was big enough to bring both St. Patrick's Day and now the 12th of July to a halt. Outsiders might not understand the emotional dimension of that, but it's hardly possible to imagine anything else which would have done the same to the two biggest events in the annual calendar. So nobody can really see yet what the full implications of this are. This changes not just the order of issues, but the issues themselves. Everything has changed. The economy is no longer the same economy as we went into the COVID-19 crisis with. We know that it has been brought to a halt. We don't know what will be left at the end of it, and we don't know what money will be left in the budget to make any changes. But what we do know is budgets, even the budget made on the 31st of March by the Minister of Finance, will not be sustainable for even a full year. Global political shifts are happening in front of our eyes. Exactly how they pan out probably won't be known even until the end of this year, no matter what happens with COVID-19. Closer to home, the Irish government is actually existing on a mandate which it got from a previous election. And at the same time as the COVID-19 crisis is happening in front of our eyes, is negotiating a potential new coalition. Again, that's highly controversial because Sinn Féin, the biggest party in the north, has become the largest party in the south. But this new coalition may exclude them from power, with all sorts of implications. In the United Kingdom, the question of the Brexit timetable, "Get Brexit done," being the slogan on which Boris Johnson was elected, may now not be sustainable. And if it is, it's not clear what kind of agreement can be made within the timescale that remains. So all of a sudden, the economy, the political context, the wider diplomatic context, and the budgets have changed. The scale of the challenge has not reduced. In fact, it has exponentially grown. The wider tolerance of Northern Ireland issues in other governments in other places has probably reduced. Any sympathy we once had for our own divisions has probably been lost. There is a significant risk that our history will cross-contaminate with the health issues, but we will have to see. And at the same time, there's an opportunity for a new relationship forged by the necessity of the moment between the parties currently in the executive. It may not have been what they meant when they said in January, this is a new decade, new approach. This is certainly a new world, and there is no doubt that we will need a very new approach. But it is where we are, and a new approach is what we need.